Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to our End of Life series. We are on session 3, and this is the week where we get very practical. So we've been kind of talking about the end of life from up here, and now we're going to talk tonight about healthcare directives, how to do them, what purpose they serve, answer whatever questions you might have about that. So promises to be a very good session. A couple of notes. First of all, there were 2 handouts tonight. The first handout is this little PowerPoint note page stapled together. If you didn't pick it up, you can pick it up afterwards. It's on the table. These are notes from Dr. Struve, who was with us last week. He didn't do a PowerPoint presentation, but these were his talking points. These are really helpful. So if you were here and you felt like you lost your way while he was talking, this is going to be an excellent guide moving you forward. And if you weren't here, you really want to grab a copy of these. And then the second handout that we have for you is a piece of paper that says Honoring Choices Advanced Care Planning. In your binders, you have a copy of this, but some of the binders don't have it printed on both sides. It's a 2-sided sheet. So if you don't have the 2-sided version, make sure you grab one of those before you leave tonight, because you'll want to hang on to that as well. I think that's it for announcements, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We've got all kinds of good things to talk about tonight. What I would like to do, this is going to be sort of our prelude to our speaker, our guest speaker tonight. I want to introduce those of you who do not know, Pat Stewart, who's a member of our faith community. If you know Pat, you know that just over a year ago, his wife Karen died, and she ended up dying while they were in Arizona. She was unable to fly back home, and so they found themselves, unfortunately, in the situation where they were making all kinds of end-of-life decisions, so they know the kinds of decisions that were coming at them. At some point, Karen was unable to make decisions for herself, and that responsibility then, of course, fell to Pat. So he also knows how end of life can throw curveballs at sort of the best laid plans. It seemed appropriate, as I suggested, as a prelude for our conversation tonight about healthcare directives, to have a real-life example of end of life and the kinds of things that come up. So Pat, first of all, thank you for his unbelievably brave yes to the invitation to have this conversation with me. We talked months after Karen died, and we talked kind of about some of this. We talked again in January, and I don't think we have talked without tears in our eyes, so we'll see what happens tonight.
Have a little of that tonight.
There could be some tears. There could be some tears.
That might happen.
So why don't you go ahead and start? What I'd like you to do is tell them a little bit about Karen's health and sort of how you wound up in Arizona.
You want me to just blow right through that, all of that?
Well,
you want to stop in the middle there, and
yeah.
You probably have something else to.
No, you go.
Okay.
You go. You go.
Okay, did you do the Twins tickets giveaway? Is that why we have so many people here? No budget for that? Okay. As Cheryl said, my name is Patrick Stewart, and we moved here from the Como area of St. Paul in 1986. And it was Karen and my 2 kids, and we really joined St. Philip's almost immediately. So if you do the math, that puts us at like 30 plus years of membership here. And it's needless to say, it's been wonderful. Just for your information, we attended the 9:45 service to begin with, and that was more to get the kids ready for Sunday school. As you know, you've been there. But then we went to the 8:30 service because of the opportunity for brunch with our friends. A little recreation after repenting, you know. Okay, well, let's get on with the meat of the topic here. About Karen's health. Let me characterize that for you. The whole odyssey, I guess, started like 7 years ago. Ooh.
Already. That's what grief does. It shows up.
I know. I didn't have this at home, you know.
But I will
You
tell
guys are doing this to me. I don't.
Pat and I talked about this, that this was a possibility, and he assured me it was okay, so.
It's definitely okay. I'll fight my way through here. There were 4 things that were her problems. The most important was CHF, congestive heart failure. And that was important because her mother had that too, and it was a congenital condition. Karen was going to get it. The difference here was that her mother lived until she was 83. Karen died when she was 66. Then there was also, this has all happened at the same time now, chronic anemia. Her hemoglobin and her platelets were very much deficient. And then she had this issue with her spleen that kept getting bigger and bigger. And we also think that that problem was contributing to the anemia also. And then there was a funny little thing, this is number 4, that caused internal inflammation. That's what the doc said. And they could never figure it out. In all the 7 years, they could never figure it out. But they did note that her liver has something called a granuloma. Now, Greg, you probably know all about this, but the ejection fraction as it relates to congestive heart failure has a numeric value that relates to how efficient the heart pumps. Her value is between 27 and 32. Average is 60. So you get an idea of how bad a problem that was. The hemoglobin and the platelet deficiency could only be dealt with, as it turns out, with transfusions, blood transfusions. And that was good because for 3 to 5 months, she had a pretty normal activity in existence. But then we'd have to do it again. And that 3 to 5 months kept shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. After 2 years, it didn't help at all. So obviously it was not the answer. So the attention was diverted to her spleen. And as I mentioned, it was getting bigger and bigger. And they thought that might be the culprit with somehow getting hung up in the spleen, but you cannot biopsy a spleen unless you remove it. So that was the thing we needed to do. But we wanted to get a second opinion, so we went to the Mayo in Rochester, and after a month of testing, they came up with Zippo also, and so it's the spleen that has to come out. Now, there's a risk involved in taking your spleen out. The spleen does provide a function in your body to fight internal infections. I keep saying infections. And it amounts to about 50% of your body's ability to fight those infections. So it's a risk, and it turned out to be a big deal for Karen later on. So we had the splenectomy, it's called, and it did have a very positive impact, as it turns out, on the anemia. The hemoglobin went up, the platelet count went up, but the Mayo discharged her with a lot of excess fluid. And this is the beginning of this issue with having too much fluid in your body when your heart is not pumping the way it should be. And so we went home, they discharged us, thinking that the diuretics that they prescribed would deal with that problem. They did not. We were back in the hospital in a week, as it turned out. That was Methodist. So the next 6 months, basically, we were in the hospital more than we were out of the hospital. We switched to Abbott, because Abbott has a much more professional team concept in trying to monitor congestive heart failure. And by that I mean fluid is the enemy. And when you weigh yourself in the morning and you're 1 or 2 pounds heavier, you got to do something about it. And they would be involved in that decision, and they would say, well, you got to alter your meds by this much. And then it was pretty good. Now, she still had infections. She still had some issues with fluid. So seriously, we spent most of the fall season in hospitals. And we would have EMTs over, I don't know, 5 or 6 times with ambulances in the driveway. And I can't tell you what, the neighbors were so spooked, not knowing what was going on. We tried to keep them up to date, but that was a little difficult. So basically, that's kind of where we were in terms of her health issues. I'm not going to go any further with the granuloma because that's still kind of, what is it? So you also want to know, Cheryl, something about our planning for end of life?
Well, so she had this long journey with sort of a variety of complications of her health, but at some point she was cleared, and they said, go to Arizona. That was an annual trip for you, right?
Yeah, and by getting cleared, and yes, it was a question of them saying it's okay to go. We made some special arrangements with docs down there to make sure it was kind of a seamless move. The guy down there was at the Cleveland Clinic with our #1 heart guy here, so we thought, wow, this is going to be like being home. Didn't turn out to be that way exactly, but she was stable, let's put it that way, for quite a while, and that was really due to the new regime handling her issues with congestive heart failure. But you want me to go right into Arizona?
So then her health took a turn for the worse while you're in Arizona, and all of a sudden, the two of you together were faced with a whole bunch of decisions that you were needing to make. Can you talk about that?
Well, first of all, let me just say that for the first week, it was great because Megan came down with her 2 sons. We had a pool party every day for 5 days. It was probably the happiest we would be in the rest of her life, frankly. And then, yes, when they left immediately, she had a pain in her side. We went right to the ER. They got her into ICU almost right away. And then they were perplexed as to how to get this infection out. And finally traced it to a pacemaker that had been installed by Abbott in order to help her heart pumping situation. And as it happens, infections tend to gravitate toward metal implants for some reason. So they're thinking this is our silver bullet. We can take out the pacemaker, and her problem's gonna. I don't know that they actually thought it that far, but they thought that was the secret. Once again, the problem was they left too much fluid in her after they took out the pacemaker. And this time, it was complicated by the fact that antibiotics had to be going in to continue to fight the infection. You can't aggressively diurese when you're doing antibiotics because it takes out the antibiotics too. So the way they keep track, as I mentioned, the way they kept track of how much fluid you have in your body is by weighing daily. She had a scale built into her hospital bed. And it got to be 41 pounds. And she only weighed 100, so this was 41% heavier, and it's all fluid. So at this point I said, this is a catch-22. They've got 2 things going on here, and they're opposing each other. I got to get my kids here.
Which was a decision that you had to make, but you were not expecting.
No, and they were in Florida. They were with their kids on spring break. And they had to get to Phoenix in a hurry because we felt like things were going to be changing fairly rapidly. It was kind of, I don't know how to describe it. I had a word here. It was surrealistic, that's what it was, because the Mayo had been promising us for 3.5 weeks that they would get her on a plane back to the Twin Cities, well enough to do that. And obviously that didn't happen. We even went to the extent that we chartered a medical ambulance complete with medical staff at some expense to get her back, but even that was thrown out because they thought, we're going to have an emergency here at 35,000 feet and they won't be able to handle it, and it would be just a tragedy.
If I remember correctly, Karen did have a healthcare directive. At some point
Yeah.
in her health journey, the two of you said,
Oh, absolutely.
we need to do this. So at the end, when Karen was no longer able to make decisions on her own and you were making them for her, can you talk a little bit about how confident you felt in your ability to know what she would want?
Well, you know, we had some experience with end-of-life stuff because we were in charge for both of her parents when they went through their last days, and we had the bullet points, we discussed it, we were in agreement, and, you know, you can say at the time, you know, no ventilators, no resuscitation, you know, nothing heroic, but you still got to make a judgment. Are we at that point where, and in our case, it was very obvious that there was no turning back because the kids got there and we had a meeting with the docs and I'm going, this can't be happening because you told us we were, but they said we can't do anything more and her kidneys are shutting down. So we went to the hospice. And then I just want to say something about that if I can get through this. It's just a thought I had about we hear it in sermons, we pray it, we do it in our devotions, and it's make God your focal point. But I really feel like you have to go through an experience like this to really bring it home. We know, I think we know, we're in God's hands, and He has a plan for us. But that doesn't prevent you from doing your own thing, trying to figure it out yourself, but it's ludicrous. This is my conclusion. It's ludicrous to do that because it's going to happen how He wants it to happen and how He plans it. This is not to say that you don't challenge your doctors. It's not to say that you don't push for it. But even poor Karen, on her last day on earth, was fighting to stay with us. We were in her room, and it was like day 3. And her breathing was extremely labored. And I just wanted her to be in heaven. That's where she should be. And Megan prompted me, and I went to her and held her hand and said, "Dear, you don't have to stay with us. You can go. We'll see you later." All of us. And 2 hours later, she was gone. So, those of you that think that maybe you can't communicate with loved ones on their deathbed, I would disagree with that.
When we talked in January, one of the things that came across as being very true and very evident is that there really is no map for the end of life. And that doesn't mean that you can't anticipate some of the kinds of decisions, but as we talked, I remember that you talked about you had to revisit some decisions you had made earlier, particularly with Mayo, and was that the right decision? And at the end of the day, I think one of the things that Pat, Susan, and I sort of agreed on was there is no one right way to do this, and you do the best you can at the time with the information that you have. So you don't get to go back and beat yourself up and be critical of the decisions that you made with a full heart and with a faithful heart. And Pat's been a marvelous example of that as we've had these conversations about a really difficult, challenging time and a difficult loss, and yet one that at the end of the day, you release and you commend her spirit back to God.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And well, it was such a long haul, and with so many things along the way, you realize, I hope I'm not offending anybody, but for 7 years, nobody healed her. Nobody really improved her health that much. They treated symptoms, plain and simple. That's all they were able to do. So I got family members that are practicing medicine, and they will tell you the same thing. There's so much that we can't do, unfortunately, and you have a faith going in, but you learn a lot along the way that it's somebody else that's pulling the strings here, and you got to embrace that.
Okay, Pat, this is the $1 million question, and it's a simple yes or no.
I didn't bring that much money with me.
And then I'm going to turn and ask you all the same question. Yours is going to be a show of hands. Pat, do you have a health care directive?
Absolutely.
You do?
Sure.
You didn't in January? This is worth celebrating. Good job, Mr. Stewart.
Did I tell you that in January?
You said, no, I do not have one. Karen has one.
No, we both did. We did a trust. We did a trust and put all that in there.
Wonderful.
Like 3 years ago. How did we get that?
How about you all? Who has a health care directive? Okay. It might be time to revisit the one that you had. And for those of you who don't have one, now's your chance to hear all about it. So before I introduce Susan, would you pray with me? Loving God, on this night, I give you thanks for Pat and for the memory of Karen. I ask that you continue to bless this faith community as it walks and journeys with those who grieve. Help us to remember that in our grief, we only feel that pain because of how deeply we have loved and been loved, and we are grateful for that experience. Ask your blessing upon Annette and Susan as they present about healthcare directives, and open our hearts that we may hear and learn and grow. In your holy name we pray. Amen. And would you, along with me, thank Pat for his brave talk. So you can go ahead and...
Can I keep this on? I can make comments during...
Maybe.
No?
Can you hear me? Thank you, Pat. I'll give you a hug later. Thank you for your bravery, and all of you. I know some of you might have other similar stories to this, and that might be why you're here tonight. Well, our next portion is on advanced care planning, and we have with us a very good expert. It's Annette Langdon. She's a registered nurse and an advanced care planning liaison for Fairview Health Systems. She's also a deacon in the ELCA. She has over 35 years in parish nursing and faith community nursing. She actually told me this today, that she says she doesn't like to say this, but she was actually the first parish nurse in Minnesota. And I think that is awesome. And she continues to focus her ministry on the integration of faith and health. She received her master's degree in theology from Luther Seminary, and she was consecrated as a deacon and part of the deaconess community of the ELCA in 2016. In the tradition of Pastor Westermeyer, I asked her a fun fact. And her fun fact was last weekend, and we all remember what last weekend was like, right? She enjoyed digging in the dirt of her garden, and then for the first time in her life, what do you think she did? She cleaned off her garden shovel in a snowbank. So that was her thing. So we are doing honoring choices. Cheryl sent out a little email that you should all have your binder with. And in your binder, if you go to the green tab under honoring, that is some of the actual documents that Annette will be talking about tonight are under that green tab. And if you go under glossary, what do you have under glossary? I have a glossary that's also from Honoring Choices, what CPR and some of those things are. So those are some of your resources in there. There was in did anyone get in there scripture that has to do, I don't know if that's in there or not, but we did talk about scripture with Jesus, how he modeled on his way to the cross, talking about death and talking about dying and his wants and wishes. And I'm going to talk a little bit about honoring choices, healthcare planning. Honoring choices is a registered trademark, I believe. And something similar started at the Gunderson Clinic in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And I'm not sure when it started there, but it came here to Minnesota Medical Society about 2006, 2007. So that's a few years ago. It took them a little while to figure out what they were going to do. They worked with the community, so it wasn't the medical society that dictated everything, but they worked together with the community, and that's how many of the hospital systems are now doing healthcare directives. The Seinfeld episode, which I was going to show tonight, but I think we're going to wait until the workshop night to run it continually in one of the rooms or something, so you guys can watch it while you're waiting. That would have happened. Does anybody have any idea when Seinfeld was on? In the 1990s, late 1990s. So that was it's about healthcare directives. So that was related to some Supreme Court cases, I think. So it's been around for a while, and now we're just having it here. So I'm sorry we didn't have it sooner, but as you've seen, technology has changed in the medical field, and things are getting more and more complicated about how to die. So we're happy that Annette is here to help us. What is advanced care planning we're going to talk about? Who needs a healthcare directive? Creating a healthcare directive, and how to make it legal are all the things that we're going to cover tonight. What is healthcare planning? It's your thoughts, your feelings, and your beliefs. Did anybody read the Being Mortal? And some of that went through a lot of that process in there. Also, we'll give you, and then from looking at that, the thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, then you go and have the conversations. And between Cheryl, I, and Nancy, when we started this series, we said, what are our two going to be top words? And I think I told you before, it's conversations, and prayer. So you'll hear that a lot. And we'll give you some resources for conversations, and I will talk to you later about those and show you some, and Cheryl has one to show you. And then the last thing we'll talk about is documenting your preferences and your choices that you make, and that is that is what happens on the materials that you have in your book. But the most important thing is the conversations. So I know what Minnesotans are like, right? And did you read that one description of a Minnesota doctor that Atul Gawande wrote about in his book, Being Mortal? That they have a really hard time talking about their feelings. And I can't remember what page it is, but I'm going like, that was so mean. He was the only doctor, was a Minnesota doctor that he's called out like that. I think there must be a little bit of competition between Harvard and Mayo Clinic or something. I don't know. Anyway, so I am going to bring up the expert, Annette Langdon, to help you out, or help you walk through a lot of these things. She's done this how many times?
Oh, I don't know. I can't remember. I don't know.
A lot of times. She said about questions, we still have the questions in the back where you can fill those out. So if your questions don't get answered today, if the millions of people that are live streaming this tonight, you have questions, you can write them into Cheryl. But we'll try and answer your questions tonight. And there were a couple questions in the box already, and I think most of them will be answered tonight already, okay? So with no ado.
Great to be here, and I want to say a big thank you to Susan and Cheryl and all the team that put this together. This is awesome. I'm one of 4 advanced care planning liaisons that are out and about doing classes that are free and open to the public. And we're always glad when somebody shows up. So we have a lot of somebody, so I'm grateful. It's not like people are knocking down the doors to come and hear us talk. So am I okay? Am I too loud, or are we good with this? Okay. So the first thing I want to say is this stuff is not easy to talk about. And that's okay, because there's a lot of things we have to do, like paying taxes or doing those taxes or other things that isn't easy. But this is really important stuff. And you've already kind of gotten through understanding that, hopefully having some great foundation of what that, of just from Pat's conversation, but also in the couple weeks ahead. So I want to underscore what Susan said. It is about conversations. If you do nothing else except conversations, that's the best place to start. The other thing I want to add on is this is a very natural process. Anytime you get together here, when there's a funeral, memorial service, or you go to a visitation, or you go just hear of somebody that is critically ill or has died, we automatically are faced with our mortality, and we automatically do this little thing of reflecting on our own mortality. And you'll hear people say, well, gee, I don't think I want to go just like Joe. He went home after church, put his feet up, and he was gone. Gee, I want to go like that. Or you'll hear things like, boy, I don't know if I would have made that same decision. We think about these things. And at that time, that's a great time to have deeper conversations, because we're open to it. So when do you need a healthcare directive? When you turn 18, I'm waiting for there to be big surprise, like the 18-year-olds turn 18 and whoopee, I get to go do my healthcare directive. But the goal really is for everyone 18 and older. Most of the cases that land in the court system because of disagreements among loved ones are younger people, because they've never had a conversation, never talked about this. My colleague, her daughter went off to college and she lofted her dorm bed and fell out of it in the middle of the night. She's a bit of a sleepwalker. And so she called her mom, and she said at Thanksgiving they did a healthcare directive. Because she said if something would have happened to her, they hadn't had any conversations about what she would want and what she wouldn't want. And so she found out her daughter wants to be an organ donor. So there was some great conversation that started. So the 5 Ds are a time when there was a lot of hands that went up that said you've already got a healthcare directive. So the 5 Ds are times when you should pull it out and at least look it over. So the first D is every decade. So when you're 20, a decade is enough, because things go fast, and maybe in 10 years then I want to look at it. But I have gray hair, so a decade is not often enough. I need to do this a lot more often than every decade. So I'm almost to the point of saying, okay, Annette, when my husband changes that battery for the smoke detector, I better look at that thing, And what I've learned, what I've done for my family is I take it out and I look at it, and then I put a little note on the back that says, reviewed such and such a date, still okay. Which then if something happens, it's 5 years down the road or 2 years or whatever, I maybe made it out 10 years ago, but my family will know that this is still my wishes. And if it's not, time to do a new one. Okay, so every decade, when there is a divorce or a change in your relationships, that's a time to be looking at this again. When there is a new diagnosis, when you get a new diagnosis and you're dealing with something new related to your health, and when there's a decline in your health. And the last one is when there's a death in your relationships, when there's a loss, just like I talked about a funeral, a memorial, or just hearing of somebody that died. That's a time when we're thinking about death, and we're much more open to have these conversations and to reflect. You want to do this whenever your wishes change. You want to do it when you can still do it, when you still have, because you have to have mental capacity to do this work, and you want to do it before you're in that crisis, because you want to have some thoughts ahead of the time. I find it fascinating. How many of you Googled maps today as to where you might go, or in the last week? So it's like we all want to know where we're going, how to get there. But when it comes to dying, we're all going to die. Do we ever think about what this journey is? Okay, so I got this illness, congestive heart failure, COPD. What's it going to look like down the road? Oh, I don't want to know that. Oh, I'm good. So it's just a time. So before you're in a crisis or before you can no longer create one. So what is a healthcare directive? It is a legal document, and that's very important for you to understand because it's different than a medical order. It is a legal document that you make out when you have capacity, when you have mental capacity. Sometimes people don't get around to doing this until they're in an early stage of dementia. And in those early days, we have good days and we have bad days. So they may still, on a good day, have the capacity to be able to do a simple form. That's okay. But if it gets too far, the hubby or the wife can't say, oh, honey, I know what you want. Just sign here. Because you got to have capacity to do a legal document. The healthcare directive is a legal document that is for the future. The way I like to think about it, it's like a first aid kit. My husband is a good Boy Scout. He is very well prepared, and he has a great first aid kit in the house, but also in the trunk of the car. So I think about, when do we bring that thing out? Only when we need it. That's the way the healthcare directive works. It only comes into play. It only holds authority when you lose capacity, when you cannot speak, make your healthcare decisions for yourself. That's when that healthcare directive comes in. The healthcare agent has authority. And if you regain that capacity, it's back in the box, back in the trunk. It holds and it speaks to your preferences, your choices, your values, your goals. It is your voice. So one of the reasons sometimes people say, you don't have to, nobody says you have to do a healthcare directive. But one of the gifts that a healthcare directive can be is your voice clearly written that can be supportive to your loved ones to make those decisions if by chance they forgot what you said, right? So every once in a while I tell my kids were over a few months back and making supper, and I said, oh, by the way, just in case you've forgotten, if something bad happens, I'm good to go. Oh, Mom, But to keep those conversations going, to be able to keep it up. But to write it down in a healthcare directive gives your healthcare agent confidence and to remember. And it also is a safeguard so that the healthcare, if we can't get a hold of somebody, we at least in the medical area have an idea of what we need to do. It's in effect when you lose that capacity. It's not in effect right away, but in the sense of if you still have capacity, you're calling the shots. That healthcare directive may never be used, okay? But I think one of the gems about the healthcare directive for us, whether it ever comes into play or not, is that it does that thing in Psalm 90:12, right? It teaches us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. So I think that's the benefit. Power of attorney. How many of you have a power of attorney or know what that is? So there's a lot of confusion about a power of attorney. If someone comes up to me, I said, okay, I'm Susie, and I'm from, not Susan, I'm Sally from California. I'm the POA. Tell me what I need to do or decide. And in my mind, I think, oh, you get to pay the bill. I'll make sure the business office knows. In Minnesota, a power of attorney is only for finance and property. It does not give that person the right to make medical decisions. They pay the medical bills, but they're not the ones to make the medical decisions. So we all are trying to relearn that and help, because in our hospitals, in our staff, we get that confused too. So we're trying to educate and learn and get that straight. So if you've got a healthcare directive, pull it out, look at it, and if there's a need to change it, you need to do a new document. So for your protection, here's at Fairview, and I don't know about other systems. I'm not aware that any other system is doing what Fairview is, but when you send a healthcare directive to us, it gets looked at twice by the scanners who are trained. So if they see a red flag, they're not going to scan it in until they send it to us to say, yes, indeed, this is valid, or no, it's not. Our team, again, looks at all of the ones that get scanned in as well as the ones that the scanners sent to us. And if it's not valid, we send it back to you. We figure there's 10 to 20% of the healthcare directives that come to us that are not valid for one reason or another. They're missing pages, they're missing signatures, or something. So it's very important if you go to the work to doing one, make sure you finish it off right, and I'll walk through what those things are. So changes void the document. So in other words, by state law, if you go in and, I don't want Sally anymore, I want Susan as my healthcare agent, and I'm just going to cross her name off and I'm going to initial it and date it, that's good to go, right? No, you can't very well go to your marriage license and change that person, right? You need to do a new document if you're going to make major changes. You can, by state law, change the address, phone number, that kind of a thing. But don't just do it simply. I had a person that put a little sticker over it, and then I had to send it back to her because I don't know who's under that sticker. It could have been Johnny instead of Sally. So anyway, we get into all sorts of things. New document automatically by state law voids the other one. So if you make one out today, next week you change your mind, you make out another one, that automatically puts this one to bed, and this one is the one that's valid. Okay, so it's automatic in the state law how it works. Minnesota is Minnesota nice. So for those of you that go south, you are a winter bird, you go down for the winter, Arizona or wherever, if you're there for a significant amount of time, so in other words, more than 2 or 3 weeks, more than a month, so if you're down there like 4 or 5 months, I would encourage you to think about doing a healthcare directive that's an Arizona healthcare directive, because if it's legal in whatever state it was created in, Minnesota will take it, whether it meets our qualifications or not. We require either a notary or 2 witnesses, but if the state that it came from only had 1 witness and it's legal there, we'll accept it. So you got to know all the states have different laws, but just to have a heads up about that. So part-time residents, good to look at that. Okay, so where do you start? You start by reflecting, thinking, having conversations, and in that tab in your notebook is a little thing called the goals, my goals worksheet. That's a great place to start because it'll help you. And I like to think about this as this isn't like I can't move to the second question if I don't get the first one. This is, you just keep reading through those until you find a question that you're ready to answer. Write some stuff down, keep mulling over it, add some more. So that's a great little thing to be able to start with. And then there are resources, and then you have those conversations. And that's one of the things I think you also have is some suggestions on how to have those conversations with your loved ones as well as with your provider. Okay, in your packet also is what we call the short or standard healthcare directive. And I'm just going to walk through that so you actually see. Now, healthcare directives come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. Some of them are really short, some of them are long, some of them are called living will. Do you remember that term, living will? Some of them, that's the title that they have on there. It doesn't matter what the title is, it's the content of it that we're looking for. In order to be a healthcare directive, it needs to name your agent, the person that is going to speak for you if you can't make those medical decisions, and or your preferences, your choices, what you want, what you don't want, your goals, values, and those kinds of things. Some people don't have anybody to name, so they just write a lot more. And other people just want to name somebody and don't bother with the writing. That's fine. But a lot of people will do both. So at the beginning of this document, it does some education. It helps you know that this replaces any other document that you've done in the past. Any other healthcare directive automatically replaces it. And then it gives you a little information about that this document is not for people who want to say, people that have a mental illness, a serious mental illness, like schizophrenia or a major bipolar disorder. There is a different document that will give their healthcare agent the right to make decisions for them about neuroleptic medications and electroconvulsive therapy. The simple one, the regular one, will not do that. So there's a whole nother directive, and Susan has the resource for that. And then the next two are a little informational for you. I will make copies and give copies to my healthcare agent and to my healthcare team. And I will make out a new healthcare directive if I've got changes, right? So it helps you know right at the top what you need to do. Then here's where you put your information about who you are, what's your birthday. We have a lot of Johnsons, Olsons, you know, all those things in Minnesota. And so we got to know exactly who you are. So important, I want to say, very practical thing. When you write this thing out, take your time, write legibly, and do not use a thin pen. Use a fat pen. Because these things get scanned, they get copied. Some of them in our system are so hard to read because it's just so light. So use a good fat pen and write legibly. Okay. Now we're going to talk about your healthcare agent. We give you room to name 3. You can do however you want, but here are some thoughts about the healthcare agent. They have to be 18 years or older. So that's the first thing. They need to be willing and reasonably available. So a lot of times when people started doing these healthcare directives, they would sign people up to be their agent and never tell them. And then this person gets a call in the middle of the night. Well, you're her agent. Oh, I am? You know, so you need to talk with them so that you know that they're willing to be that for you. And then also that they are reasonably available. So they don't have to be the child that lives the closest. You know, well, I suppose I better have Johnny because he lives in town. And I'd rather have Sally, but he lives in town. It doesn't matter where they live, as long as they have a cell phone and they answer it, and they're reasonably available, and they know what you want, and you trust them to carry out your wishes, right? That's the main thing. When you think about personalities, the person that is the best for this role is somebody who can think clearly under stress. And the person that will have a difficult time with this role is someone who cannot tell you where they want to go for supper tonight. That they will be that will be a harder thing. And typically, that person, if you ask somebody else in the family and tell them that, they'll say, I'll be supportive of Johnny, but boy, thanks. I really don't. You know, they'll be relieved. And they're, you know, this is tough stuff. I think a lot of people, when they first started doing this, they named their spouse, and they didn't name any of the kids because they didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. This is not about hurting people's feelings. This is about helping the person that can do this do it well, and letting other people off the hook, being glad for that. But making sure that they all know. So if you got 5 kids, sit them all down. Ideally, if you can sit them all down together, or do a conference call or a Skype or whatever all together, have conversation together so everyone knows Johnny's up to bat first, Sally is next, and da-da-da-da. What, okay? And there are sometimes we have in our family, God, that person that can make those decisions, really good, but God, they're so opinionated, and I don't know if I can trust that they're going to do what I want because they have this strong opinion elsewhere. So you really need to make sure that they're going to do what you want. They need to be your voice, not their own for you. Big difference, right? Not their voice for me, but my voice. That's really important. So we give you 3. We typically want you, the best way to do this is say, here's the first person up to bat, behind that person is this one, and then this one. Important to have, if you can, at least one alternate, because if we can't get a hold of the first one, we'll go to the alternate. And then when the primary one is available, we'll go back to that one. Some people want to say, I want my spouse and then I want my 2 kids to act together. Fine, just make it clear what you want. So we pay very big attention to these little tiny words, and, or. If you say Johnny and Sally, that means we're not moving forward until Johnny and Sally are on the same page and they agree. If you say Johnny or Sally, that means either one, we're good. If you say Johnny and or, that means you kind of probably want them to work together, but if not, one is good. So help us out, make it clear, however you want to do that, okay? There are particular, you can add powers. Your healthcare agent's authority ceases when you die. However, the first one is about, I want my healthcare agent to make decisions to continue pregnancy. If you're in that age group, you may want to consider that. Otherwise, the other one is make decisions for the care of my body after death. State law says that when somebody dies, the care of the body after death, it goes to next of kin. So for a lot of us, this is not, don't need this. But for families that are unique or estranged, somebody may say, I want this part of my family, I want this person to carry out my wishes, and I don't trust this part, this side, or whatever. So make it clear if that's something that would be helpful for you. Then we get to the second page. We ask you to put your name at the top of it, and then we ask you one question. So this healthcare directive is what we call a standard, simple form, and this is for basically most people who are generally healthy. So this is all you need when you're 20 up to until you get to have some issues, medical issues. So there's a longer 4-page document that we now have that we think is more for people that have chronic or serious illness. And Susan has copies of that, and she can get that for you if you're in that boat. So otherwise, we ask you to think about if you're in that state of permanent unconsciousness, and there's some education here to help you understand what that is. But simply, it's not like, oh, you've been in the hospital and we've had 2 hours and you're not responding. This is permanent unconsciousness it's after a period of time when there's been some testing and all that sort of stuff to be able to understand that you're not coming back, okay? So that we give you 3 choices. I want everything. I want whatever's possible to sustain my life, or I don't want anything, or you know what? I don't know. And so if I don't know, I say, let my agent decide, right? Okay. Then we ask you a question about organ donation. And what I understand is that you can have it here, but make sure this syncs with what you have on your driver's license. Because what I'm told is that what's on your driver's license is going to be that'll go, So make sure that that's in sync. There is no age limit for organ donation. I think recently I heard that the oldest person that donated part of his body was a 93-year-old. So a lot of times they can use parts of the eye, or they can use tissue. Generally, they take that off of the back. They do a lot of testing at that time to see what might be of help. Now, there's this little line that says additional instructions. I have attached, because maybe I want all 9 kids named as an agent. I don't have enough room on that first page to write them. So, and actually I saw one healthcare directive with all 9 kids listed right down first this. So not enough room, add a page, but let us know, because this is a legal document. So if there's one of 2 and 2 of 2, I won't know if you attach something. Well, did you mean that to be part of it, or is that just interesting? If you mean it to be part of the legal document, I need to know that. And I'll send it back to you if you say, yes, I'm attaching something, and you don't. I'll say, where's that other page, right? So just be careful about that. This is how you make it legal. So here, in this process, this is not something you're going to do overnight. You got to have some conversation. You got to have some thought. Do some reading. Great stuff that you've got going on here. Pop in and see Susan or Nancy, Fabian, or Cheryl, Pastor Cheryl, and be able to talk about these things in your families. So you have some time of thinking about these things, and then you get around to writing it. Once you get around to writing it, you've gone through all this work, then finish it off well. So read the little words that it says on here, because it'll tell you exactly what to do. So you need to sign it and date it. Preferably, you're going to wait until you've got either witnesses or a notary, because they need to say, yes, this is your signature. So then here's what makes it legal. You're either a notary or 2 witnesses. So it's either or. You don't have to have both. But some people, when they're going to go they're south for the winter, They might go ahead and do all of that because it might cover more in the state that they're going to. So that's something to think about. There are rules about the witnesses. So if I've named Johnny and Sally as my agents, they cannot be my witness. They cannot be a witness to my signature. So anybody that I've named as an agent cannot be a witness. So if I've got 5 kids and 2 of them are my agents, those 2 cannot be, but the other 3 could be witnesses to my signature. The other rule has to do with the health system that you get care from. So only one person from your health system, and I don't care if they serve food or if they're a volunteer, if they have a badge from your health system, only one of them can be a witness. The other one has to be somebody else. And it could be the pizza delivery guy as long as he's 18. Okay, so that's how you finish it off. Make copies. Review that every those 5 Ds. Talk about your choices and create a new document if there's changes. So the copies, where do they go? Where do they go? You make a copy of your healthcare directive, and who do you give it to? Your healthcare agents, the doctor, yep, your clinic. So in the health system that you belong in, whatever health system that is. So in Fairview, if it comes to Fairview, it's wherever Fairview is, which does include the University of Minnesota. But Allina, wherever Allina is. So if you go to Allina, but you have a specialist at the U, or the Mayo, you need to send a copy to those 2. Because that doesn't automatically transfer. So you need to send one there too. So I think we zipped pretty quick. And I refrained from telling more stories. So do we want a question? So where do you... Oh, thank you. Oh. Okay, so, right, for people that live alone, that's not a bad idea. He said, where do you put it? Do not put it in the safety deposit box. Nobody can get to it at 3 a.m. So you always want to keep the original, and copies are good for everybody else. If you live alone, it's not a bad idea to put it on the refrigerator. The paramedics are taught to look at the refrigerator in an emergency. So that would, now let me just... Do I want to open this box? So here's the deal. If they come, they cannot follow, the paramedics cannot follow your healthcare directive. They need to have a medical order. So if you've got complicated medical stuff and you're worried about that, you need to have a conversation with your provider, your doctor, your nurse practitioner, and have them give you a medical order that you can put on your refrigerator that then the paramedics will follow because it is a medical order, okay? So I'm aware of the time, yep, go ahead, Larry. Good question. So if something happens, you're incapacitated, and you do not have a healthcare directive, what happens?
Repeat the question.
I just did. I just did. So the question was, if you don't have a healthcare directive and something happens, who makes the decisions? By state law, it is next of kin. However, in Minnesota's law is not real clear. It's not this, this, and this. Some states have nailed that down in the legislature. So in Minnesota, it's a little fuzzy. Generally, it is the spouse. So some of it depends. It generally, what happens is it goes to who is the next of kin according to the health system's policies. Most of them would be your spouse first. If the spouse isn't there, then it gets a little iffy. It could be adult children and parents. But if it's children, it's all 5 or 9 children together. They're not moving forward until they're all on the same board. If there are no children, and then it would go to siblings, and it's the same thing. It would be all the siblings together, and it only takes one to be troublesome. So that's why conversation ahead is what's so important. Way in the back? Yeah, so the question is, if you have two sons and you put or, it's Johnny or Jimmy, right? So, and they have very different views. How do you decide? I would really encourage you to say that if they can't agree, this one's the tiebreaker. This is the one, because we would like your weight on that to say if we had to listen to one over the other, who would that be? Or if there's only two, help us out. Help us know which one you're weighted to. So which one, if they can't agree, who's the tiebreaker? Same thing if you got three kids. Or four. If there's an even number, help us know who's the tiebreaker. So it's not easy, but the more we can talk about this ahead. The other thing to say with both your boys is say, I don't care what you guys think, I want you to know what I think. That's what's important, and that's what I want you to do, is what I think. And don't be, getting into this sibling rivalry because of me. There's all those things. And you could just be honest.
Complication could come if you have three, and you've used the word "and" in there, and they don't all agree.
So if you've got three kids and you say so and so and so and so and so and so, then we're sitting there until we got some agreement. And just so that you know, in our hospitals we have amazing people that help with these things, because there are messy families and messy things that happen in all of our families, right? But there are chaplains, and there are social workers, and there are people that are trained in ethics, and they have care conferences, and they have all sorts of things to help families come to grips with what is it that dad would say. What, if he could speak, what would he want? So there are people that will help with that. But you can do your part by having these conversations ahead, helping your family know as much. And we are seeing the benefit of this work. We are seeing people that come in and they'll say, well, I'm so glad we already know what Grandpa wanted or Dad wanted. We already know. So we still have some decisions. It's not an easy thing, but we know. And that's a good thing. There was one back here.
This form looks very straightforward. So if you do not have chronic illness, why would I pay $900 to a lawyer to do this?
So the question is, this looks pretty straightforward. Why would I pay an attorney X amount of money to get it done? That is your choice, and we don't care where you get it done. If you want to do that, that's fine. Here's my concern, and we see a lot of documents, and a lot of them come from lawyers, and there's nothing. Here's what I worry about. There's a lot of nice language here, and it would be really easy for me to just read it through. Oh, that sounds good. Check off, sign my name, I'm done. I would much rather have you struggle with the wording, agonize over it a little bit, rather than saying, oh, gee, that sounds good. You understand what I'm saying? So I worry about it being somebody else's form and not really yours. That's my concern. The other thing is that some of the forms that come to us from the attorney's offices don't give us enough information about your agent. It's, I want John Johnson. I don't know who John Johnson is because there's no address, it's just John Johnson. It's not my son, John Johnson. So help us out there too so we've got enough information to find them. And I know our time is, so I want to just check in here. What do you want to do? You keep going?
One more question.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very good.
Clarify, if you're a snow mark, I was, never occurred to me. Are you suggesting that if you have a healthcare directive in Minnesota and you are, as Pat was, down in Arizona, that it may not be legal?
So you all heard that question, right? Okay. State laws are different in different places. So mostly what would happen if it's probably just fine. It's if there got to be a problem and somebody didn't agree or whatever, then we would be looking for that healthcare directive. If you need that to be legal, then that would be the problem. Would that state hold it not just for guidance, but would they really take it as legal? So that's where it gets a little dicey. The other thing to say is, some people will say, gee, maybe I better carry that thing with me all the time. I better put it in my box. I better put it, have it with me. So, as people of faith, I think the thought is, how much faith do we have in the day, in God in the day, right? So if something bad happens, 911's going to get called, you're going to get to the hospital, and God's going to be there ahead of you, and things will get figured out as that time comes, right? There'll be tests, there'll be phone calls, there'll be, as much done as needed to be. But the directive and will speak, your agent will speak, so if people are at that end stage of life where, they really don't want CPR, they don't want a lot done, if 911 gets called, they'll get to the hospital, they might be doing some stuff, but as soon as we know that this is that, then that's when we shift to what those wishes are. So here's the other thing I want to just say in closing, and that is that, 100 years ago, we just died, right? You just died, right? Then we got CPR, and we've been on this roll, and in our country, we've done everything, right? And we kind of think, well, we better do everything, because if I really love Mom, I'll do everything. Now we're starting to rethink all of that, right? We're trying to figure out how do we die well? How do we do that better? So what I want to say is it's messy. We got a lot of work to do, and I can guarantee you I'm going to be dead before they get this working really well. But we're on it. We are changing culture with this work. This is not easy work, and it's changing culture. So don't, if we screw up, we all screw up because we're not talking enough about this stuff. So the more that you do in your own families, you're changing culture in your families by having conversations and having a healthcare directive. And kudos for you and blessings to you in this deep and important work. So thank you. Oh, sorry.
Just one of the things from Being Mortal, if you've all read that, one of the things that came out that really hit me was family members that had family members who had done a healthcare directive or had the hard conversations, they were far less likely to be depressed after the death of their loved one. So having those will spare your loved ones maybe some depression, just knowing that they did the best they could because they had that talk with mom or dad or their sibling. I had a couple of questions. Do you want to go first? Or, go ahead.
I'm going to do the as you leave tonight and what's next, and then Susan's going to come back. First of all, as you leave tonight, please know that we have extra copies of the worksheet and the short form healthcare directive on the table in the back. So if you want to bring home an extra copy, you need to update one, or somebody who needs one, please don't hesitate to grab one of those. If we run out, we will make more for you. Secondly, there's a box for questions back there, as we've been doing. Some of those questions I think we're going to answer in an email to you so that everybody gets the answer. Some of those questions are going to be answered next week, so if you've submitted a question and you haven't heard the answer yet, stay tuned. We're being mindful of those. The resource table has new materials on it. One of the set of materials there refers to an ethical will. If you do not know what an ethical will is, the most clear way to describe it is neither ethical nor is it a will, but rather it's essentially a love letter that you leave as a legacy for the next generation. We will probably do a series on that next fall and assist you in preparing one, but you might want to take a look at those materials. Bring your binders next week. Next week, Carrie Erickson from Garrity Delmore will be with us, and she will talk about what happens at the time of death, what happens when you come to the funeral, come to the funeral home, how do you make the arrangements, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'll do the second half of it, which will be what to expect from the church and what kinds of decisions are you going to be making. And you have materials in your binder that we will refer to, so please make sure you bring your binders for that. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m. is a columbarium information meeting. If you have not attended one of those yet, this would be your last chance. That is at 7 p.m. in the Learning Center, which is across the hall over there. Pastor Westermeyer will be with you. Finally, on May 9th is our workshop night, and this is important that you hear what's going to happen. We will have 3 of the 4 pastors, Valerie will be out of town, 3 of the 4 pastors will be there to help you make prearrangements or answer questions. We'll have an estate attorney, a grief counselor, 2 funeral home directors. We have 2 nurses plus our parish nurse. They will all be available here to help you begin to talk about, ask questions about all things related. But most particular, having that notary present will be very helpful to you if you need to update your healthcare directive or you prepare one and you want to make that happen. One last thing, and that is when you leave tonight, every person needs to grab a set of these cards. If there are 2 of you in your household that are going to use these cards, like if you're here with a partner, when you pick your card, take a different color. So there's like 5 different colors. This is a yellow pack, there's a purple pack, a red pack, an orange pack. It will help you keep track. They're called Go Wish cards, and what they do is they invite you to start the conversation in probably the most friendly way possible. So if Marilyn and I were doing this together, I'm going to have my deck of cards, and I'm going to put them into 3 piles. Very important, don't care about it all, not sure. Marilyn's going to do the same thing for me. She's going to say, I think this is what Cheryl's going to say, and then we have a conversation about that, and then we reverse roles. So it's a really interesting, helpful way to have a difficult conversation. Amen. I'm going to be quiet now, and I'm going to turn it over to Susan, who's going to wind things up for us.
One question was about being frail from last week, because Dr. Stuve used that word. So I asked my husband, who's a doctor, what do doctors think being frail is? Well, every doctor probably thinks that's different for a person, but I looked it up, and they said, I call my dad is frail, and I've been saying that for the last couple of years. It's a state of delicacy or weakness which encompasses age-related frailty, in particular osteoporosis. And my father has severe osteoporosis. And that came across at several different places. Weakness, lack of balance, endurance, immobility, wasting. So some of those things. If someone calls you frail, then you tell them that's your definition. So homework. We have homework before you come on workshop night. And I know you guys are getting really old for homework, maybe. But the homework would be to go through the Honoring Choices My Healthcare Goals. Look through that. Use the packs of cards that you get, the Go Wish cards, and just to give you a little spoiler alert, I did the Go Wish cards, not with my husband, but with my mother. She put them all in the most important one, except for a few, and she's a nurse, so I don't know, you go figure that. But the other thing is, if you remember the first slide we had was thinking about your feelings and beliefs. If you read Being Mortal, these were the 4 questions that he asked when he was realizing he needed to ask these questions to people that were making choices about their health care. What are your biggest fears and concerns? What goals are most important to you? What trade-offs are you willing to make, and which ones are you not willing to make? So those are some of the things that you can look at for looking at feelings and beliefs. The others is, remember the conversation? Do you guys remember Angelo Volandes that was here for Faith and Life? He has, in this book, is one of the first things that we did start talking about healthcare directives a few years ago. I don't remember what year it was. But on page 163, he has 4 questions also that he thinks are really important that you ask people. So if you have that book, you could go to that. The other one is, we talked about the Go Wish cards, which is a great resource. The Go Wish cards are also available online, so they will keep yours on there and you can turn them around. The other one is that we learned about when I took class with Annette. It's called the Hello Game, and there's one back there in the resource. This one is I would say the Go Wish cards are if you're a little bit closer to death is probably they're better for. These ones are more for almost anyone, and I can read you a couple of them. If you had one day to say you were sorry to anyone you wanted, who would you say you were sorry to first before you died? What's your earliest memory of a difficult decision? So there's about 31 questions in here, and they're all great questions to get you thinking. And it's a game, and you have chips and stuff like that if you buy the game. Otherwise, you can buy I was going to write all the questions out for you, but I think I would have breached some copyright rule there. So start those conversations, hello game, good wish, Go Wish cards. And people want to share their memories as they pass on wisdom, keepsakes, settle relationships, establish their legacies, make peace with God, and ensure those left behind are okay. They want to end their story on their own terms. So this is your story you're writing, and your story is so important. And that's why we're here, to help you write your story and help you realize what your story is and how you might have some control over your story at the end. But like Pat showed us, you don't necessarily have control, but at least it gives your loved ones some idea of what you would want. So go ahead and work on your healthcare directives before you come on May 9th. I would love to introduce you to my two beautiful nurses that will be helping me. Would you, Nancy and Luann, do you want to come down? So Nancy Fabian, who you met before, she has worked for 15 years in a general surgery department with surgeons doing a wide variety of surgeries. She is trained also by Annette to do healthcare directives. So she will be there on May 9th and also available later on for people to make appointments with. And this is Luann Culhane. She's retired as of like how many weeks? Like weeks. Retired RN case manager, and when she was in her position, she assisted patients with advanced care directives, but she did some of the really hard 20-page advanced care directives, so she has some really good experience on our team. So these two will be helping me on May 9th, and if you have questions or want to come and do that on the round robin. So thank you very much. Does anybody else have any questions or any comments before? I have those available, yep. And those are a little bit more complicated. Okay, I think that is all. Was there anything else, Cheryl? Okay, so you guys can go get your Go Wish cards, and we'll see you back here for funeral planning. And you can laugh when we watch the Seinfeld episode on May 9th while you're waiting.